The work known as the Acts of Barnabas is a 5th century pseudepigrapha claiming to have been written by John Mark, the supposed author of the Gospel of Mark. And it gives an account of the life and deeds of Barnabas. Its supposed place of origin is Cyprus, because it is part of a small body of works whose purpose was to establish the traditions of Christian Cyprus, independent of the Church of Antioch. The Church of Antioch controlled the Church of Cyprus. At length, the Cypriots wanted independence from Antiochian oversight. In this struggle, they emphasised the apostolic history of Cyprus, and the Acts of Barnabas is a key work describing how the gospel arrived in Cyprus and how the Cypriots inherit an independent tradition with Barnabas at its head. In this 5th century Acts of Barnabas, there is the following notice. And Barnabas had received documents from Matthew, a book of the Word of God, and a narrative of miracles and doctrines. So there are 2 works mentioned as received by Barnabas from Matthew, a book of the Word of God and a narrative of miracles and doctrines. This is the notice, I believe, upon which the medieval Gospel of Barnabas has been formed. It corresponds to a narrative of miracles and doctrines. The book of the Word of God then corresponds to the book referred to several times in our Gospel of Barnabas, the old book of Moses and Joshua. That is, the origins of the Gospel of Barnabas, as we have it, are in the Acts of Barnabas, 5th century pseudepigrapha. Clearly, our current Gospel of Barnabas is a reworking of an older text to bring it into line with the author's Islamic sympathies. It seems to be a work by a convert. But this convert has taken an existing narrative of miracles and doctrines, that is, the gospel account of the ministry of Jesus, which is nothing but a narrative of miracles and doctrines. And he knows an old book of Moses and Joshua. My surmise is that at some point, someone has written works to correspond to this notice in Acts of Barnabas. Barnabas received 2 documents from Matthew. Barnabas had received documents from Matthew, a book of the Word of God and a narrative of miracles and doctrines. This is an open invitation for someone to write pseudepigraphal works, forgeries, corresponding to these 2 works. My suggestion is that this is what someone has done, and that our Muslim convert, much later, is using this material to craft his vexatious gospel in Barnabas's name. His source is a book of the Word of God and a narrative of miracles and doctrines, first written to fill in the notice given in Acts of Barnabas. So our Gospel of Barnabas participates in the Barnabas tradition in this way. It is connected to the Acts of Barnabas. Someone at some point has composed a body of pseudepigraphal literature in Barnabas's name, which literature attempts to establish legitimacy from Ignatius, Bishop of Antioch, and conforms to the literature supposedly travelling with Barnabas, as reported in Acts of Barnabas. How this material arrives in the form we have it today is at this time unaccountable, but somehow our author knows such Barnabean documents, material already in the name of Barnabas, and has reworked them into his gospel. His gospel, diatessaron, is based upon, uses structures and materials from, a lost work, post-5th century, purporting to be the narrative of miracles and doctrines that Barnabas received from Matthew. But he also knows, or knows of, accompanying that narrative, an old book of Moses and Joshua, a Torah, a book of the Word of God. This is what is behind our Gospel of Barnabas. A Muslim convert has material from the Barnabas tradition of Cyprus. He knows a book of the Word of God and a narrative of miracles and doctrines. He reshapes the narrative of miracles and doctrines into his own gospel, the work that is now extant in Italian and Spanish versions. But there was an underlying gospel associated with Barnabas, he received it from Matthew. This is why Barnabas is listed with Matthew among the disciples in the medieval work. To recap, where are the origins of our Gospel of Barnabas? The idea is at least to be found in the 5th century Acts of Barnabas, a work itself written to establish Cypriot apostolic credentials against the Ignatian Church in Antioch. That work reports that Barnabas received documents from Matthew, a book of the Word of God and a narrative of miracles and doctrines. Our Gospel of Barnabas corresponds to a reworking of that narrative of miracles and doctrines, and the old book of Moses and Joshua mentioned in our Gospel of Barnabas corresponds to the book of the Word of God. We see this notice in the Acts of Barnabas reflected in the Islamic-inspired work that emerged in Italy in the Counter-Reformation.